History is a lie agreed upon, but trauma is the only truth that leaves a scar. October 1347. 3 ghost ships dock at Messina. The oars are still. The decks are silent. When the guards stepped aboard, they didn't find pirates or gold. They found a cargo of the dying and the dead. But the real killers weren't human. They were invisible. And they were hungry for a world that thought it was safe. This is the story of how a microscopic parasite dismantled the human ego. This is the architecture of fear. You're watching Psyche of Power. Today, we dissect the Black Death, not through medicine, but through psychology. We think we're different. We think our civilized brains would react with logic. We are wrong. Under the right pressure, the civilized brain doesn't just break, it reverts. Meet the amygdala. In 1347, this tiny piece of gray matter became the Supreme Court. The Pope and the King of Europe. The first casualty of a plague isn't the body, it's the other. Psychologists call this the behavioral immune system. It's an evolutionary shortcut. Daka. Mark Schaller posits that our brains evolved to equate different with dangerous to avoid pathogens. In the 14th century, this wasn't just racism. It was a primitive, biological firewall. Cytenvoisentus, il deviant une arme biologique. Le contrat social dépend de l'avenir, sans avenir, le moral expire. Within months, the just world hypothesis began to shatter. This is our first cognitive reversal. We want to believe that good things happen to good people. But the plague didn't care about your prayers. It killed the saintly nun. It spared the ruthless thief. The result, a total collapse of narrative logic. If God isn't keeping the deal, why should we? This is the birth of the plague nihilism. Some turn to the Decameron lifestyle. Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we rot. This wasn't a party. It was a psychological defense mechanism called counter-phobic behavior. If you can't control the death, you mock it. You dance with it until your heart stops. By 1348, Europe wasn't just a graveyard. It was a giant laboratory of human despair. Time had stopped. The psychological present was the only thing that existed. But for most, nihilism was too cold. They needed a reason, even if that reason was their own blood. Act 2, the logic of madness. Enter the flagellants. This looks like insanity to us. To them, it was the only logical agency left. Psychology 101. Humans hate randomness. We would rather be guilty than victims. If the plague is a random biological event, we are helpless. But if the plague is punishment, we have power. If I bleed enough, God will stop the itch. It was a bargain, a violent, desperate bargain for control. But the internal locus of the flagellants soon turned external. If God is angry, who tempted him? Who poisoned the wells? This is where the behavioral immune system becomes a behavioral executioner. Between 1348 and 1351, over 200 Jewish communities were wiped out, not by the plague, but by cognitive dissonance. The philosopher René Girard argued that when social order collapses, a scapegoat must be sacrificed to restore unity. The mob found peace in their shared hatred. The violence was the glue that held their shattered minds together. It's easier to burn a neighbor than to admit that the universe is indifferent to your survival. Fear doesn't just change our actions, it rewires our empathy. Even the healers fled. The Hippocratic oath died long before the patients did. Here is the cognitive reversal. The church, the ultimate source of safety, proved to be the ultimate failure. When the Pope's own doctors surrounded him with fires to purify the air, while the poor died at the gates, the divine hierarchy lost its psychological grip. The seed of the individual was planted in the soil of mass graves. If the king can die, and the priest can die, then what makes them better than me? This is the leveling effect. Fear is the greatest democratizer in history. But the survivors were left with a question that would haunt the next 3 centuries. Why am I alive? This leads us to terror management theory, TMT. TMT suggests that all human culture is just an elaborate buffer against the paralyzing fear of our own mortality. After the Black Death, our change, it became obsessed with the macabre. Remember, you must die. This wasn't a warning. It was a psychological anchor. Act 3, the resurrection. The reversal you didn't see coming. The labor shortage meant the fear of starvation was replaced by the power of choice. The survivors didn't just inherit the land, they inherited the ego. The shift from feudalism to capitalism wasn't just economic. It was a shift in identity. I survived the wrath of God. I am important. This is post-traumatic growth on a continental scale. When the old world burns, the new world has room to breathe. Information became the new vaccine. If the priest can't save you, perhaps the book can. The Black Death forced humanity to stop looking at the heavens for answers and start looking at the earth. The Renaissance wasn't a rejection of the Middle Ages. It was a psychological rebound from the Black Death. From the ashes of 50 million corpses, we built the concept of humanism. But wait, did we actually learn anything? Or is the architecture of fear still standing? Mireles Pijor. En la pandemia de COVID-19, ¿qué vimos? El mismo sistema inmunitario conductual, el mismo chivo expiatorio. Mejores herramientas, pero la misma amidal. Seguimos siendo animales movidos por el miedo, disfrazados de lógica. La peste en situ cual la civilización es una alucinación frágil. La creatividad suele ser una reacción a la catástrofe. Construimos lo bello sobre nuestros miedos más profundos. El miedo divide, pero la conciencia de ese miedo nos da poder. Si entiendes la arquitectura de tu miedo, puedes elegir no vivir en ella. Don't fear the reaper. Fear the monster he turns you into before you die. We are the descendants of the survivors. We carry their trauma and their resilience in our DNA. You are not a victim of history. You are a student of its psyche. The ships of Messina are always waiting in the harbor of our minds. The question is, will you board the ship? Or will you build a better world? Knowledge is the only true quarantine. Stay curious, stay analytical, stay hardcore. If you found this deep dive into the dark side of history valuable, hit that subscribe button. Because power without psyche is just a slow way to die. See you in the next one.